All right, today I'm tearing into a Yamaha Virago 500 motor. We're gonna start by tearing down the top end. We've got the front cylinder head here, we've got the rear cylinder head with the rear cylinder here. We got the clutch on this side here, it'd be the right-hand side, oil filter, then on the other side we got the charging system, and that's kind of the order we're gonna go in. Top end, clutches, stator flywheel, bottom end, crankcase, transmission, output shaft, the prop shaft, and that yoke there. So I'm going to start just by pulling our head off here. We've got our front cylinder head camshaft is under here with a sprocket. Our cam chain tensioner is on the bottom side here of our front cylinder, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. We're going to use a lot of 5mm Allens on this motorcycle here. I'm going to pull these off. If these are extremely tight, I want to warn you, maybe don't use an impact to start it. Use a socket wrench, that way you can just get a little better feel for it. A lot of these have been fairly easy to pull off. I pulled a handful of them off just to get a feel and see if things were going to come apart easily or not. And these went fairly smooth, so I'm just going to keep on going with the impact here. Go ahead and pull this off. A lot of times you will get a little bit of oil coming out of there just because of the position that sits in there. There's your front cam chain tensioner there. To actually use this tensioner, you need to pull this 19mm bolt off of here, and then that adjuster will go in and out just like that. We're going to set that aside. And a lot of these parts we're going to mark, that way we know front or rear. Now, pulling that cam chain tensioner out, it's going to give us a little bit of room here. We're going to pull this front sprocket cover. Just, again, 2 Allen bolts to remove that. All right, we got the cover off there. That's a cam chain sprocket cover. We've got an O-ring there that seals that up. I'm going to set that aside. What the cam sprocket looks like here with the chain, if you can see that. We've got a bolt here holding the sprocket on. We're going to pull that bolt. That cam sprocket is going to pop off there. Then we're going to be able to push the cam sprocket down slightly, pull that chain off. That chain's fairly loose the way that it sits now, but a lot of times you won't be able to pull that completely off until you pull that sprocket. 14mm socket there to pull this cam chain up. Go ahead and impact that 14mm off. Now we can just pull that cam sprocket. I'm gonna let that chain drop. Be careful from this point on that you don't turn that motor over. You could potentially break that crankcase down below there. So just be mindful of that. We've got a couple Allens on top here. These are gonna be 6mm Allens on top. And those are pulled off. We'll turn our cylinder head here. We typically would have a motor mount on top, just like you do on the back one here. That's already been removed when we pulled this motor. Now, I've done other valve adjustment videos and stuff on this machine. You do not have to pull the motor to do those adjustments. Grab a 17mm socket here. Okay, cylinder head bolts are off. We've got one over here that I see. It's a 12mm. We're going to need an extension for that. It's right by that spark plug there. All right, got that one removed. Got all the cylinder head bolts off there at this time. All right, now a lot of times you can just take and tap up on this exhaust cylinder head valve there, cover there. You just take and pull that up just like that. That'll allow us to lift that head right off of there. Cam shaft is right underneath here. To remove that, 2 10mm bolts, then this has got a keeper here, you pull that out and just slide that cam right out of there. You may have to work it around your rockers there on either side. Set that aside, we'll pull that front cylinder. We've got a couple Allens here that we got to fish down. One here, looks like that's about it. Those we'll actually have to use an Allen like this to get down into. We don't have the longer Allens out right now. We've only got 2 of these that are going to need to be removed. One on the front, one on the rear. So you can see there we got a little bit of rust down in that cylinder. We'll inspect that. Before going back together, we've got our cylinder head gasket here. We'll remove this. You never want to reuse a gasket like this. All right, and then same as the cylinder head, you can take and just pivot that up a lot of times. Sometimes it'll stick on these cylinder head studs that run all the way through there. We'll take and pull this back guide up here, set that aside. We can get that to slide up. Sometimes our gasket will stay on the bottom here. It looks like we got about half and half. Our base gasket here stayed. Some of it came with us. So a lot of times that's what will hold us up. Your CM number is there. That is your engine CC size there. We'll go ahead, we'll actually hone this cylinder out. It's a little, got a little buildup there. It looks like this motorcycle sat for some time, but actually the cylinder and the piston look really, really good, except for a little bit of buildup there. So a quick hone will a lot of times fix that. We'll go ahead, I'm gonna turn this motor over now. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this piston off here. To do that, I'm gonna grab a clip or a pick and pull this circlip off. We're gonna take and push this pin out. We'll go ahead and pull that piston up there. We'll inspect it really good, and we'll probably get new rings for this one. But we'll measure it and make sure it's in good condition before we do anything. I'm gonna put that clip and that pin, keep everything together there for the front cylinder, and then I am going to go and pull the rear cylinder off. Everything is gonna be almost identical. I'm gonna show you that process. Cylinder head here, we've got 14 millimeter, so along with our cylinder head cover mounts. Camshaft, sprocket cover here. Gonna go ahead and get that removed. Okay, we'll set that aside. We've got our cam chain tensioner on this side here. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this 19 millimeter bolt just to show you what's underneath of there. And that is what the cam chain tensioner looks like there. You got a spring and you've got a rod running through there. You got a cat brass seal or this washer here, then the bolt, and that actual plunger part of it will push down in there. It'll come out when we remove those Allen bolts there. All right, that cam tensioner will pop out there. Now you can see what that cam chain tensioner does there. That spring and that shaft will push that in, goes like that. That cam chain tensioner isn't able to go out unless you pull that little lever on top here. That'll allow it to go back in. So as that tightens up, it tightens on that guide that runs down there, and I'll show you that when we get into this cylinder, and then it can't release and go back the other direction. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those back together again, just to keep everything together. That'll automatically push that cam chain tensioner post out there. Go ahead, now that we've got the cam chain tensioner out, we can go ahead and remove our cam chain. So to do that, I'm going to remove our sprocket, 14 millimeter bolt here. Spun that, we've got a plate on there, and then we can go ahead and remove our sprocket. I've showed you what that sprocket looked like on the camshaft on the front cylinder there. We'll set that aside. We're gonna go ahead and remove our two Allens here. Those are the larger ones, remember? Now we've got a 12 millimeter bolt over here by our spark plug here. Grab an extension. Now we can just take and pull our head off of there. A lot of times you can get your fingers in between those fins there and pry up. If you can't, there's a little bit larger fin on the front, on the back there. You can get in there, pry those up. We'll set that aside. We'll inspect that, those valves. Make sure they're in good usable condition before we go back together. There is a lot of times a little bit of oil that's going to be in those heads, so make sure you let that drain out before you set that on somewhere where you don't want oil. Our guide there, just going to be able to pick that up out of there. I like to keep the front and the rear separate. I believe these guides are identical, but just because it's easy to do, I'm gonna separate them. We'll grab our Allen here. This is the 5 millimeter that sits right along the base of the cylinder. We're gonna go ahead and remove that. Now this cylinder is ready to come up out of there. We'll pull that up. We've got an O-ring down here that kind of seals up that cylinder, that seals up this cylinder barrel here, because we do have our gasket still underneath there. That's a paper gasket. This is what they call the base gasket. Pull that piston circlip out now. Put my thumb over top of it, that way it doesn't go flying across the room. I also, if all we're doing is top end, I want to make sure we don't drop it down in that crankcase, so I like to just put my finger over top of it and take and push that piston pin out, and then keep everything together here. I'm going to take and put my circlip back in here, and we'll inspect this cylinder and we'll inspect the piston to see what all needs replaced here before going back together. A lot of times you can just take everything, look good just at a real quick glance. So a lot of times they'll just replace rings on there when we're going back together. Next, we're going to dig into the clutches here. I'm going to go ahead and pull maybe a couple sensors off here that are going to be in our way. I'm going to prop this motor up, and we've got our oil filter over here, and then we've got our clutch cover here.